Hey everybody, it's Jewel here. Thank you for joining me for our weekly Lullaby series. Oh, I've been painting all day. I'm a little brain dead. I can't wait to tell you guys more of what I'm up to creatively, but today I am so happy to focus on mental health and music and the connections between mental health and music. It's a direction that a lot of my music is starting to take, and I'll probably tell you guys a little bit more about that. But this is a journey that started for me a long time ago. It started with Lullaby, an album I made back in 2008 maybe. I wanted to do it as an experiment because I wanted to see if how I sang and how I produced a record could elicit a certain response in people's nervous systems. And I thought, what better people to look at helping than mothers and newborns. And the album has just become this incredible evergreen album that college kids are using to study and people use in traffic to avoid road rage. The response to it has just been so above and beyond anything I ever could have hoped for. And so recently I've been actually studying more and more the effects of music on people's mental health, on their nervous system, and even on brainwave states. Today, I have a very special guest, Dr. Amen. He's incredible. Please give him a follow, doc_Amen. He looks at brain health and basically the physiology of our brain and how that connects to our mental health. His work's really incredible, so I'm really honored that he is joining us today. I am going to invite him. See if he picks up. In the meantime, why don't you guys think of some questions to ask Dr. Amen. Hi, Dr. Amen, how are you?
Hi, Joel. What a joy to meet you.
Nice to see you. How are you today?
Having a great day.
Good. Really passionate about your work. For people that may not know who you are, would you tell people who you are and about your clinics?
So I'm a psychiatrist, different in that we look at people's brains before we go about changing them. I have 11 clinics all around the United States. We've done almost 300,000 brain scans over the last 35 years. And what we learned is that most psychiatric problems are not mental health issues, they're brain health issues. Get your brain healthy and your mind will follow. And part of that is music, because music is processed in your brain, and certain brain wave patterns, certain types of music actually make you happier. Certain types can disrupt your brain. If you're listening to angry, hateful, negative songs, your brain is more likely to feel chronic stress. And so music can be healing, it can hurt, but it's very powerful on the brain.
Yeah, I've really been researching lately the effects of music on the brain and seeing that resonant music can trigger dopamine responses, our pleasure and reward centers, the amygdala, the hippocampus. It's tied to memory and emotion. Is there any place for music in mental health, or how would you suggest people use it in a daily practice?
Well, people have been using music therapy since before Hippocrates. And so music can be healing. Certain musical patterns. I've actually been involved in 4 albums where we create brain enhancing music, music for sleep, music for mood, music for energy, based on different patterns in the music. So, yeah, I absolutely believe it can be healing. And I think most people know when they hear a song that they just love, that it can elevate their mood almost immediately. Even people with Alzheimer's disease, a very serious memory disorder that they don't recognize their own children, start playing a song that they love and they know all the words.
Yeah, I've been watching elderly patients with dementia that can sing songs from their childhood and remember choreography. It's pretty incredible. Um, I started my album Lullaby years ago to see if I could help regulate. I started writing my lullabies for myself to regulate my nervous system. I had panic attacks, and I found that when I sang, and specifically sang in a specific way, I would get into my parasympathetic nervous system. It had a massive effect on me and would actually allow me to sleep by just soothing myself. And so when I released Lullaby years later, after I wrote these songs, it's been incredible to see this album since 2008. That's a long time ago. Every year is my highest selling album. At the time, nobody wanted it because I was trying to sell it as an anti-anxiety album to record labels. And they were like, what is anxiety? We don't care. And so I was like, it'll be a lullaby record. And I ended up producing it completely independently. But more and more, I've been taking my music into this idea of I actually am working, I've never announced this, but I started working with a woman named Dr. Erin McKiernan she's a professor of physics and biomedical physics program at the National Autonomous University of Mexico City. Um, and we've been studying some music I've been making recently and showing that it's getting people into theta brainwave states really quickly, like within 20 and 30 seconds, and learning how to keep people in those brainwave states. Is that something you guys have ever studied, like the actual sort of brainwave patterns?
We've actually done EEG work. So when people talk about brain wave states, it's delta, which are really slow, sleepy waves, theta, which is relaxed, daydreaming waves, alpha, which is focused and relaxed, beta, which is really focused, high beta, anxious. And certain types of music can increase delta waves and help you sleep, or increase theta waves to help you relax, or alpha waves to help you be more creative, depending on the beat in the music. So there's a concept called entrainment, which means your brain picks up the rhythm in the environment. And so hard rock, we actually studied, it just disorganized the teenagers that, not hard rock, heavy metal, disorganized their thinking. We actually had them play memory games while they listened to classical music, rock, country, heavy metal, and they performed the best with classical music on memory task. The second best surprised us. It was country music that they scored the second best with, and heavy metal just disorganized them.
I saw a study recently of termites that they eat through wood faster with heavy metal. I don't know who did the study and how they did it, but I thought it was funny.
It's very funny.
So I'm really fascinated by, I have a mental health foundation, and we have kids with a wide variety of things that they're struggling with. And I have a lot of parents who have kids with bipolar, with sort of more serious things than maybe just generalized anxiety. When you're looking at brain health from a psychiatric side, what do you see with schizophrenia? Obviously, that's very different than bipolar, but borderline. What do you see with that, and what hope could people have of changing the physiology of their brain to help their psychiatric outcomes?
Well, every day through your behavior, you're helping your brain work better, or you're making it work worse. And so I have my patients ask themselves this question every day: if what I'm doing right now, is it good for my brain or bad for it? And I think bipolar disorder is way overdiagnosed. I think it's often a result of a concussion or a traumatic brain injury, and the typical treatments for it are not very effective. And I often say, well, if you don't look, you don't know. And I just published a very large paper on schizophrenia. And yes, we see decreases in the prefrontal cortex and too much activity in the dopamine center. So the medications we use for schizophrenia often block dopamine. because if you increase in it, can actually make them more psychotic. Psychotic just meaning they lose touch with what's real and what's not. But one of the most interesting parts of my work is we have found things like traumatic brain injury or infectious diseases like Lyme disease and COVID can really trigger psychotic processes. And if you don't get the cause right, you'll never get the treatment right. And one of the most interesting slides I ever show people is the highest incidence of schizophrenia in the United States is the Northeast, the North Midwest, and the West Coast. But if you overlay, and this study actually comes from Schizophrenia Bulletin, if you overlay the highest incidence of Lyme disease, they're identical. So I think anybody with schizophrenia, one, somebody should be looking at their brain. And two, they should be at least screened for infectious diseases like Lyme, herpes, other viruses that can have a negative impact on brain function. These are not mental disorders, they're brain health issues. And that's sort of the big mission I have in life, is to end the concept of mental illness. No one wants to be called mental. No one really wants to see a psychiatrist. No one wants to be labeled as defective or abnormal, but everybody wants a better brain. So what if mental health was really brain health? If it's mental health, then there's medication and therapy. If it's brain health, you need to eat better. You need to exercise. I have one of my really fun patients. I couldn't get her to stop smoking pot. I'm not a fan of marijuana. It was really disorganizing her. And then I got it one day. She was an animal lover. I said, you know, you have the hippocampus. You mentioned the hippocampus. It's Greek for seahorse. And it's the only part of your brain that continues to make new brain cells throughout life. And every day you make about 700 new hippocampal stem cells or baby seahorses. And I said, and when you smoke pot or drink, you're murdering the babies. And she looked at me and she said, Dr. Raymond, that's so unfair. You know I love animals. But that's the point. Every day through your behavior, you are increasing healthy brain tissue and brain activity, or you're decreasing it. Whether it's eating high quality food or low quality food, you're either increasing or decreasing your chances for a mental health disorder.
So it's really overwhelming navigating, you know, mental health services. I have a cousin who's schizophrenic. I have another cousin who's had a couple psychotic breaks. And just being in the field in the way that I am, really, it's hard watching people navigate, especially because I've been in this field a little while, and I just last year heard somebody give a talk about tick-borne related illnesses, COVID, and those things causing what appear to people as mental health issues, but they're really health issues. How would you, just anybody watching that might have a child with bipolar, with borderline, or something serious like schizophrenia, not that it isn't all serious, how would you suggest they start, like, what would they ask their doctor? How would they start this process to start to look at more of the medical side of it?
Well, I'd start with one of my books, The End of Mental Illness, Change Your Brain Every Day. I would start with either of those just so that you can ask the right questions. And then if you're really struggling and the simple things are not working for you, think of coming to one of my clinics and looking at your brain. I think, you know, psychiatrists are the only medical doctors who never look at the organ they treat. And because of that, we're in this sort of mental health disaster in the United States, where 57% of teenage girls report being persistently sad. And we can't divorce the mental health epidemic from the physical health epidemic. Because if your body is not right, of course, your brain will never be right. And so I believe the answer to the epidemics of depression, Alzheimer's disease, obesity, and diabetes is not to see them as separate disorders, but as different expressions of the same unhealthy lifestyle and exposures to toxins and infections. And if you start thinking of the world with that sort of unitary idea, get your brain and body healthy, your mind will follow. It's a revolution whose time I think needs to come. But if you never look, you never know that things like traumatic brain injuries, mold exposure, general anesthesia, infections like COVID can radically disrupt your brain. One of the fun things I did is I was on the Kardashian show and I had scanned Kendall. Kendall had very severe um, post-COVID anxiety. And you can go, oh, it's because of fame, or oh, it's because of her relationships, or oh, it's because of the chronic stress. But the fact is, she never had that before she had COVID. And when you see her brain, her emotional brain is just on fire, secondary to what we've seen with COVID inflammation in the brain. So when you start thinking of mental health as brain health, it changes everything. And for me, it's been so exciting to see people get better.
And so how do you calm that? Like in her case, you're talking about a low inflammation diet, a low histamine diet? Are you talking about a detox? Like what would a protocol be for somebody like that?
So my favorite, omega-3 fatty acids, high doses of omega-3 fatty acids because they're anti-inflammatory. Curcumins from turmeric, anti-inflammatory. Actually, brand new study. When you add curcumins to antidepressants, the antidepressants work way better. When you add zinc to antidepressants, antidepressants work way better. Isn't that interesting? I think that's just so interesting. Quercetin, and one of my favorite supplements is saffron because saffron is not only anti-inflammatory, it's been shown to help mood, memory, and pain. And so the beautiful thing, see, I think of the scans like a map, right? You've heard a picture's worth 1,000 words, but a map is worth 1,000 pictures. A map tells you where you are and gives you direction on how to get to where you want to go. So when you were having your panic attacks, for me, I want to look at your brain and go, is part of it working too hard? Or maybe part of it's not working hard enough. And right, how do I know unless I look? And then target the treatment to your brain rather than just a cluster of symptoms.
It's really fascinating work, especially considering, how many people are medicated without ever looking into any of these underlying cofactors, much less being given a plan of how to treat them. I really love, I was raised in Alaska. I grew up on a homestead and we never went to a grocery store. We lived off the land. And so big nature, lots of outdoor activity and all natural food of what we raised. And it was a real culture shock when I came down here to the lower 48 just to see what people were eating, how that affected my body. Uh, and you always had these quote unquote hippies or new age people talking about herbs, food is medicine, gosh, don't have plastic bottles for water. And it was so fringe, in the late 80s and 90s. And it's so beautiful now. I just feel like there's all these old hippies out there feeling very vindicated. Like we knew it. We knew science would catch up to us.
Well, I think it's so true. And I've been blessed. I think I've been to Alaska 15 times. I worked with a lot of Indian tribes up there. And, what you eat matters. But you know, also in Alaska, because the winters are so long, people get depressed, they get seasonal affective disorder. And because light is so long in the summer, there's more mania that you have to really sort of manage your circadian rhythms. But living off the land without all of the food additives and toxic products that you put on your body is good. So it must have been quite the shock to not only get fame, because fame is not
It's
good for the brain.
traumatic.
It
I,
wears
you know,
out the pleasure
I
centers in the brain.
promised myself when I was young, I almost didn't sign my record deal. I was homeless when I got discovered, and I almost didn't sign the deal, and people were very shocked. But I had a really abusive childhood, and I knew that if you take a kid like me and God forbid I become famous, it's every biopic of every musician you've ever seen. I knew that statistically I should become a drug addict or do very poorly. And so I had to make a very strategic plan that my number one job was to learn about happiness. My number two job was to be a musician and to never, ever, and I'm really proud of being, 51 now, that I've never swapped those. I would take years. And that's back in the day when nobody took mental health breaks. There wasn't even the word mental health. But I knew I did not want to die and leave this planet famous, but not happy. And I'm so proud that I've made that. And I tell that to people all the time. When you make your happiness your number one goal, and granted, happiness is a side effect, it's a result of choices. But when you learn how to make better choices that lead to better outcomes, and you insist that's the most important thing in your life will change so dramatically.
Well, happiness is a brain function. I just published a very large study on adverse childhood experiences on a scale of 0 to 10, how many bad things happen to you. And that changes your brain, but you can change it back through the decisions that you make. So I love hearing your story.
It's so true. There's so much beauty. And, I work with a lot of kids with suicidal ideation, and to see what it's like on the other side and the joy and the happiness that's available, being able to amplify that so that people know there is another side. You do make it, and tremendous joy is in store waiting for people. It just takes a little bit of education, and sadly, education a lot of times costs money in our country. And I think the work you're doing and just you taking the time to talk with us today is helping make that information accessible so that happiness is available to everybody.
Well, that's why I write. That's why, I post. I think everybody should have access to the information, and I want people to help me create a brain health revolution. The end of mental illness begins with a revolution in brain health.
So we have just a few minutes left for people that are with us. I know that alcohol is just, it's terrible for the brain. We'd love to say one or two drinks is okay. It turns out zero drinks is okay. Is that true or false?
True. And anything that
Marijuana.
increases your risk of 7 different types of cancer, you should get rid of. And plus, you say stupid things, and your decisions are not as good, and it's just not worth the calories. Marijuana, I'm completely not a fan of. I mean, if you have cancer and it helps you eat, great. But the idea that it's innocuous is a lie. Teenagers who use marijuana in their 20s have an increased risk of anxiety, depression, suicide, and psychosis. I published a study on 1,000 marijuana users. Every area of their brain is lower in blood flow. Another brand new study, not from my group, but from another group on another 1,000 marijuana users, young users, the learning and memory centers of their brain were lower in activity and blood flow. And I'm very worried about psilocybin because yes, I think maybe there's going to be some medical uses for it, but now everybody thinks it's innocuous. And my 21-year-old daughter says, Dad, they're not drinking alcohol, they're having mushroom parties. And I'm very concerned about that.
Yeah. So if people are wanting to disassociate with marijuana, they're wanting to check out with alcohol, I sort of see this as, I think there's only two states of being dilated and contracted. And the types of drugs we're attracted to are correlating to which of those two states we need to get ourselves in. So, certain drugs take you up basically, and certain drugs take you down. With the ones that help take you down, which seem, very popular, alcohol, weed, those types of things, what are some other techniques that people could use as tools when they want to reach for that glass of wine to unwind, or they're angry and upset and they want to smoke a joint to try and regulate their system? What else would you have them do in that moment?
Um, Music, as we talked about, diaphragmatic breathing. And that's actually one of the beautiful parts of singing. You have to learn diaphragmatic breathing, where you breathe mostly with your belly so you can get all of that air in and out. I teach my patients the 15-second breath, 4 seconds in, hold it for a second and a half, 8 seconds out. So take twice as long to breathe out as you breathe in. If you just do that for 2 minutes, you will break a panic attack. Uh, Never leave a situation that makes you anxious, unless, of course, it's dangerous, because if you start leaving when you have a panic attack, the panic will begin to control you. And then I teach all of my patients to kill the ants, the automatic negative thoughts that steal their happiness. Just because you have a thought has nothing to do with whether or not it's true, whether or not it's helpful. Learning to discipline your mind is just critical. And then, if you really feel freaked out, magnesium, theanine, ashwagandha, GABA, all simple supplements that just sort of take the edge off. So don't leave, breathe, write down your negative thoughts, correct them. Because I'm not a fan of positive thinking, I'm just a fan of accurate thinking. My wife never listens to me. Well, that makes me feel really sad. But is that true? Absolutely not. She listens to me all the time. She just wasn't listening then, right? But it's these cognitive or thought distortions that drive most of our anxiety. And there's a technique I love called havening, which is bilateral stimulation, either doing this, or I guess my favorite is this. When I get upset, I'll think about it for like 10 seconds, what I'm upset about. And then for 2 minutes, I'll do this, but then take my mind to the beach, or take it to the mountains, or take it to Disneyland when it's not crowded. And just distract myself while I'm doing the bilateral stimulation, and it calms down so many of my patients.
Yeah, when I started having my panic attacks when I was 15, I had moved out at that age. So I was paying rent, I was on my own. It was super stressful, and I didn't know what these panic attacks were. But I had them frequently enough that I could start to experiment with things, just by using my curiosity of like, all right, I'm having these. What can I do during them? And something that I noticed really worked for me and started to become my magic tool was I would do this visualization where I pretended I was out on the ocean on the stormy sea, and I would make myself see the colors. I'd make myself smell the salt and the ions in the air from the lightning. And then I'd let myself fall backwards in the ocean. I'd feel the temperature of the water, and I'd see the light and the color change, and they would turn to soft blues, and I would hit the bottom of the sand and it was soft. And I realized that by like taking myself through those colors and tastes and smells, I was always out of my panic attack by the time I hit the bottom of my little sandy ocean bottom. And then I found I could ask myself questions down there like, what, what was it that was so scary? Or I could ask myself questions and I would see things. I would know things in my own body like, oh, this was something that worried me, or I'd noticed something that I didn't notice at the time was troubling.
You were putting yourself into a hypnotic state. And that is so helpful. When I was a medical student, I took a month elective in hypnosis. And it's really focused attention, but rather on the panic, on something that is helpful, something that is healing. And you are learning how to manage your own emotional state. And when you use marijuana to do it, you're not learning anything, right? That's an outside force. Or if you're using Xanax to do it, you're not learning anything. and therefore your brain becomes dependent on a substance. But I love the creative way that and you said something so important. I always teach my patients, be curious, not furious. Every day you win or you learn. And having that curiosity, learning mindset saved you.
Yeah, I find another thing that's really helped me is we only can change what we're in a relationship with. You can't disassociate from something. I never could disassociate from something, push it away. Even parts of my personality I didn't like, like my anxiety. I had anxiety about my anxiety. And I found that if I would get calm, meditate, and I'd visualize my anxiety as a person walking towards me, and I would sit down with it and I'd say, what's going on? And I realized my anxiety is just trying to tell me something might not be agreeing with me in my environment. Just like if you eat bad salmon and it makes you sick, I might have been consuming a thought, a feeling, or an action that doesn't agree with me. And it gives my body almost like this allergic reaction of anxiety. And I learned to get excited about my anxiety because I started to see it as an ally. And every time I had anxiety, it was like, ooh, okay, good. This is my body's way of trying to let me know I just consumed something that didn't agree with me. Now I can get really curious about what didn't agree with me. And it might be that, oh, every time I hang out with Susie, I'm anxious. And I wasn't noticing it, but my anxiety let me notice it. It really became my friend, and that's changed my whole relationship with anxiety.
Well, we need some anxiety. People who have low levels of anxiety die early from accidents and preventable illnesses. They're also much more likely to get divorced and go to jail because our anxiety is there to tell us something. But when it's too high, when it's out of control, it's really important to have ways to rein it in that help you feel good now and later versus now but not later. And alcohol, yes, it'll lower your anxiety, but you'll be in withdrawal 24 hours later and you'll go, "Oh, alcohol helps me," when in fact you're just medicating the withdrawal.
I'm selfishly going to ask you one more question since I have you. I get the worst anxiety at night when I try to fall asleep. It's been a pattern of mine for decades and decades. Do you have any suggestions?
So two things. Do the breathing at the rate I talked about. 4 in, hold it for a second and a half. 8 out, hold it for a second and a half. I actually have an app called Brain Fit Life 5.0, and it has a breathing pacer that is just so good because it'll pace that pattern. And so many people just fall asleep. Also on the app is hypnosis for sleep, one of my favorite things to do. Uh, and one other thing, the thing I do every night, and this, if you just do it for 3 weeks, your level of happiness goes way up. Go, what went well today? So when I go to bed, I say a prayer and then I go, what went well today? But I do it in a very structured way. I actually start at the beginning of the day. When my eyes open, I start tracking. At bedtime at night, I go back and I track what went well today. Because, sort of like you, I'm busy and lots of good things happen, but I just sort of gloss over them. That's my time to anchor them into my nervous system. And I do it until I fall asleep. And usually I'm asleep by noon.
That sounds really nice. Well, thanks for the generosity of your time. Thank you for the work that you're doing and continue to do. It's really lovely that you're out there. I know that you don't probably have to work, so the fact that you're doing this just really shows your passion and how much you really care about the mental brain health revolution.
What a joy to be with you. Thanks so much for
Thank
helping
you.
me share this work.
All right, bye.
Bye.